All right, welcome everyone to episode 55 of Nutanix Weekly Podcast. I have with me today Mr. Jirah Cox. Jirah, how are you?
Doing well, man. How you doing? Happy Monday.
Yes, happy Monday indeed. And Mr. Ben Rogers, how are you?
I'm doing fine. Glad to have you on a podcast, Harvey. I missed you on my first one, but glad to see that you're on my second.
Yes. I meant to be on the first one, but it just did not happen. And so, last week I was on vacation. I come back today and jumping back into the podcast. I'm like, all right, who are you again? And what are we talking about?
Where do I work? What's my job?
Yeah.
Was it a good vacation?
It was actually a good mental vacation that I needed more than I thought I did.
The better the vacation, the more forgetful I am when I come back.
Yes. And so I've been plowing through that all day today. So but good to be back. Glad to jump on with you guys and do this. We're talking through today converting your cluster to AHV and configuring Leap for disaster recovery. So just in the title there, I'll let you start, Ben, since you're the newcomer. We're gonna ask the F and G. What is AHV? And what is Leap?
AHV is the Nutanix hypervisor. So Nutanix has their own hypervisor that we run on our platform that can be replacements for other hypervisors, i.e. VMware, XenTegra coming from our Citrix days. Leap, I believe it's not called Leap anymore. It's called something else, but I could be making a new guy mistake there, Jirah, to be honest. But that's our backup and data protection products.
Totally.
So that's a whole slew of protection tools that we have that can be replication, backup, but basically are hinged off the Nutanix goodness of how we store data in our clusters. So hopefully that was a good F&G answer. If not, Jirah, jump in and save me.
No, 100%, and totally true about we are totally going through kind of a top to bottom rebranding. But yeah, the native data protection, replication, recovery, orchestration, all still that we all know and love. That was definitely formerly branded as Leap. This article, I love seeing it pop up on the blog. This one again comes from that Nutanix community forum, right? Nutanix.next.nutanix.com. This one is a second blog from Jerome, who did the previous one that we covered, referring to the at that time the ESXi Metro setup. So this is he actually is killing like a whole bunch of birds with like one stone here with one blog post. So multifaceted, converting from vSphere to AHV. Setting up the synchronous rep, the RPO 0 on AHV to AHV. So again, that my VMs won't write data until the second site has acknowledged that I have that data off-site already. And then lastly, at the end, we'll get to this. He has a really clever script that then can also help with automatically tagging and categorizing virtual machines in the environment, which is part of the construct for managing data protection, right? Is moving from like a folder-based structure to tag-based structure. So we'll walk through all this. It's a great article.
Yeah, man, that looks perfect. I was just bringing it up as you were talking through that, and that totally looks logical. Yeah, I read it that fast.
Man, super impressive. And so this was Jerome doing this in his lab, where of course rebuilding would be a perfectly valid strategy. It's just a lab, but I think this is so neat that he also does show the real world use case of converting a cluster from one hypervisor to the other, with very minimal VM downtime and of course no data loss. So we can get going. So he calls out before the conversion, right? And this of course is all in the documentation. Some of the prereqs, right, around what do we need the cluster to do to prepare to be converted at the hypervisor level there. So the first one would be NGT, the Nutanix guest tools. That goes into each VM. And really the key portion of that is that it also does some driver injection, right? So that it can talk to the new storage controller, get to all the vDisks that those VMs are going to want. Each host, of course, each hypervisor instance needs to have a NIC uplink team. So not just one port, please. Need 2 NICs preferred. LACP load balancing disabled, just to make sure that the networking will come back up in a simplified manner. It can get re-enabled later on, but for the conversion workflow, LACP disabled at the time. HADRS should be enabled at the vCenter cluster level. And then, of course, we're going to pause DR activities because we're going to have VMs turning on, turning off. The cluster itself will be starting at the per node level. So DR activities, their application will get paused as part of this. He hit something here first. Jerome's first screenshot is something I've hit in our labs plenty, where the conversion wizard will throw you a quick little error if every host's vSwitch configuration is not identical and homogeneous. So he has one example where he has one host that has like 4 NICs, but he's using 2 of them. And it's saying, hey, this host using 4 NICs, but only have 2 of them live, doesn't match, host 2, for example, that only has 2 NICs and they're both live. So make those all match, take those uplinks out of the vSwitch as a quick fix there to prep for that conversion.
Yes.
So then next he goes in to disable admission control. Disabling admission control is important because we're probably going to violate your admission control thresholds, right? Admission control says if I have 4 hosts, don't let me power on more than, say, 3 hosts worth of resources by default, or n-1 levels of resources, so that I can't get too tight if I then have a host failure. Well, we're actually going to cause a host failure as part of this process, right? We're going to take one host out of the pool and have one host's less resources, one host's fewer resources. So disable your AC there by design. And then, since this is Jerome doing it in his lab, the lab that he used to set up Metro availability, he's going to go ahead and roll back and disable the Metro configuration. So delete the opposite data stores after he's made sure that all the machines are running at the right side of that Metro pairing. So with those prereqs in place and all knocked out, he can get started, which is, like so many things on Nutanix, it's about one click. So he just goes into Prism, picks the cluster, and just goes settings, convert cluster. That kicks off a whole bunch of validations, checks, pre-flight inspections. There's even a great link here to what is that validation doing that users can click on and explore. But basically, when it's done with all of its pre-flight checks, it's going to tell you, hey, we're ready to go here. Do you want to proceed? You're going to probably pick yes if you want to proceed. Then you're going to get kind of we used to use this a lot for all of our upgrade UIs, kind of this like multiple progress bars, and then one kind of leads the pack and the rest kind of follow it. So at the nuts and bolts level, what this conversion is going to do is it'll change one hypervisor, one host, right? Or we say one node at a time to the new hypervisor. So it'll pick some host, let's say it picks host 3 to start with out of a 4-host cluster. Reboot that one, reinstall or install a new hypervisor, in this case AHV, and then do all the things it needs to do to become a Nutanix node again. So bring up a CVM, confirm all the storage is still there, all the vDisks are still there, and then roll on to the next host. So the nodes get reimaged to the new hypervisor one node at a time.
All right, Ben. Jirah said a lot. I just want to make sure that you don't want to add anything that he left out.
So I'm going into former customer mode here instead of
there you go.
Instead of Nutanix employees. So I do have a few questions on this, and I hope these would be the things that your customers might ask. Okay, so when these hosts are coming down and they're being brought up and they're being converted to AHV host, the VMs that we're running on this, I assume they're being vMotioned off, or are they going down? Tell me about that process. What's happening to the VMs as this process is taking place, and at what point is the VM being moved from ESX over to AHV?
I should make sure nothing has changed since I last did this in the lab. I think they're powered off because they have to be, right? They're going to change hypervisors. There's no real way to do that online. So there's a little bit of impact to each virtual machine. This whole operation goes under the giant, maintenance window umbrella. So not a non-disruptive operation to individual virtual machines, right? Although the data, of course, is 100% safe. So since they're powered off, they're actually probably not live migrating, right? I think it converts all the hypervisors while the VMs are powered off. And then at the end, it flips all the VMs from being vSphere VMs over to AHV VMs and then remounts all of their storage, which isn't really fundamentally touched during the process.
Once the VMs are being powered up and being converted over from vSphere VMs to AHV VMs, what's the time frame look like on that? Now, I know performance, power of the environment is going to have a play, but statistically, what could a customer think of how long that process would take if they were dealing with a 3-node environment?
Totally. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I actually like that Jerome called out, he put a stopwatch on one of his. His first host took 30 minutes, which is pretty reasonable for an automated hypervisor installation, and then all of the post-install steps, right? Which he actually even goes to the detail of itemizing, like rebooting into the installer. After that's done, running the CVM installer, and then a couple more subsequent reboots after that. So it's about a 30-minute process per node. That sounds about right to my mind. So that will, what people should be hearing there is it does take longer on larger clusters, less time on smaller clusters. It's a scale-out operation.
I think a lot of customers are going to be looking at this with the changes that are coming down with VMware. You know, I mean, this could definitely be something that we're talking to a lot of customers about it. We've had a few that have kind of started the process, but I imagine in the future this is going to be a story that we're going to have to learn to tell, and you know, probably in a couple of situations walk through the customers doing this.
Totally. I still remember one of my first POCs at Nutanix that I ran. This is going back almost 5 years. It actually, you know, this was a key criteria of the proof of concept was if we deploy with one hypervisor, can we, you know, how painful is it? How quick is it to change after the fact to another choice? So, yeah, for sure. I think it'll only get busier and busier doing that.
Yeah, I agree. That was kind of similar for me, Jirah. I had a customer who, when I was first getting started in Nutanix, this was one of their requirements, like that it could just swap from one hypervisor to the other. And when they said it, I looked at the guy like, "You wanted to do what?" And I was like, you know what? I'll humor this. I'll go look. And I was like, oh wow, it can actually do this. and here we are, you know, years down the line later, and you know, we're still talking about it, still telling the story. To Ben's point, but this will definitely be something that we see a lot more coming up.
Well, you know, and for those customers worth calling out here, one more consideration that Jerome touches on here, we need vCenter running somewhere other than this cluster for this process to work, because we need to be able to make vCenter host automation calls to vCenter, so we need it turned on and powered on through the entire process. So if necessary, migrate that somewhere else other than the cluster that we're going to be migrating. So pro tip there.
Yeah. And agreed 100%. And I know that there will be people who say, well, why? Why does it have to be that way? Well, you need vCenter the whole time in order to make things work. And if the cluster is converted, but vCenter is still there, it's not really vCenter anymore, is it?
Right, for sure. If this is the only cluster it manages, then yeah, it is going to be the Maytag man, right? Not a lot to do.
No, I have a question about that. You know, you were talking about that the system will go through its checks and balances. I assume that's one of the checks that it makes, that the vCenter is not running on the cluster you're converting.
It's a great question, and one that I don't have the answer to. I can picture it both ways. I could get fancy with like scripting and being like, hey, what's my vCenter IP address? Do I see that IP address on one of my uplinks? Is it on one of the VMs that I'm hosting here? But I can also probably think of edge cases where that detection logic would probably not apply or get missed.
Yes.
So that's probably a good one to verify at the human level of vCenter not on the cluster we're going to convert.
Yeah, I would say the same. I see too many holes in having it. And it's funny, right? I'm saying this right now, and I just described doing this before. I'm like, you wanted to do what? But it probably does do it, and I just don't know it. So, no, that's a great question.
Yeah. So as our clusters convert here and finish that process in Jeroen's lab. So he walks through the process to recreate the Metro containers. So the storage containers that go from A to B and then from B back to A, because again, in his lab, he's going to simulate running live workloads at both of these two sites at the same time. And either site can protect the other after a failure and recover the workloads. So he's recreated those Metro storage containers there for replication. Lastly, he's going to go into Prism Central. And then now from here on out, the rest of the process basically involves recreating the data protection and the auto recovery functionality for the VM protection, right? So at this point, the hypervisor conversion is all done. In his lab, we can extrapolate 30 minutes to say it took about probably 2 hours to run through for a 4-node cluster. So then he goes back into Prism Central, whether that's one PC managing 2 clusters or one Prism Central managing each of its own availability zone. Either way. So he enables Leap, right, or the artist formerly known as Leap, for VM replication. It's primarily powered by categories. So when I categorize a VM, and a VM can have multiple categories, right? Like it can be tagged for production, Windows, ERP, and in those 3 tags, I'm describing, the OS, its prod, dev, test stance, or validation, as well as the application it's running, and I can tag it multiple ways, as well as also then tie my data protection to all those tags. So we'll get into how do you tag your VMs, because if you just did this process fresh, you probably have potentially no tags. If you've been doing vCenter centric management, and then you switch over to AHV, well, then you have no tags. We should fix that for you. So Jeroen walks through a very clever way to do that here at the end of the blog post. But so he goes through and creates tags that he then ties with his protection policies to match that, VMs that are running over at site A need to replicate over to site B, and vice versa. VMs at site B replicate over to site A. Again, doing that synchronous replication, so RPO 0. So all data is acknowledged and stored at both sites before we acknowledge it back to the virtual machine. A lot of this we've covered on previous blog posts, but again, this is actually pretty standard Nutanix Leap configuration, right? So protection policies replicate the data, and then the recovery plans are what describe how do I want to bring my VMs back online. So this is where for Metro, right, we're going to always want to use stretched layer 2 networking, right? We have to have the VM be able to recover without needing a re-IP action, right? So it was a single IP address over at site A, same IP address over at site B. If you're going longer distance, and if you're not doing synchronous replication, then of course you can also get into things like re-IP addressing or moving the network to follow the virtual machine. But for this use case of the RPO 0, you probably want automatic failover. So he talks about how to set up the threshold there for connectivity as well. He wants, in his words, automatic failover of the protected VMs from cluster 1 to cluster 2 after 30 seconds of being disconnected. So it's going to monitor for the status, and then if it loses its peer site, it'll automatically recover those workloads.
Right.
That gives you that outcome of, recovering my VMs at 3 a.m. with no humans involved type of availability for the business. Coming on down here, he talks about how to configure the power on sequencing. So you can actually have that set to, hey, it's 100 VMs, power them all on at once, or these 5 first, these 15 after that, and then the remaining 80 after that. So you can define your phases and startup orders in either hand-picked lists of like this VM, that VM, or again, reuse those categories, right? So add a tag, add a category for power on first after a DR event, power on second, or tag them. Of course, we're all thinking of like domain controllers, load balancers, delivery controllers, and net scalers, right? So critical stuff up first, less critical stuff or dependent stuff comes up second. And of course, he calls out here a neat thing that if you are using that stretched layer 2 networking, then you can do live migrations, which is pretty neat. So then you can actually live migrate VMs from one site to the other, because again, the storage is already replicated and staying in sync. You can define your test networks. So we always ask you to define, if you can, do 4 networks. So if you have site A and site B, you really want to have site A test, site B test, as well as site A prod, site B prod. some people think about DR, they think I need 3 networks, right? Prod, DR, and test. And our view of the world is probably that you need 4 networks, because after you've failed over, we want you to be able to have a test that goes back the other way back to where you came from. So you'd want, even if you fail over to site B, you probably want to have a site A test and a site A prod network. So 4 networks for that. And then he shows, that his he shows in his blog post the buttons to click on, the walkthrough for performing the live migration from cluster, in his case, cluster 1 to cluster 2. No downtime to the VM, no lost connectivity there. Mm-hmm. And then I'm not going to redo the script because it's long, and it's very machine. Harvey's disappointed. I'm not going to read a script live on the podcast. But so this is really cool. So we've talked about this before a little bit. Playbooks, right? Which is they're within Prism Central. They're sort of like, if you've never automated anything before in your life, this is how you get started, right? So it's codeless automation. It's click and drag. It's if this, then that. Chaining some events from wait until Friday at 10 p.m., then shut down this VM, then take a snapshot, then grow the vdisk, and then power it back on and send me an email that it was all done, or a Slack or Teams message. That kind of automation that you can just click and drag and do it all with your keyboard and mouse. So this is a way to take that framework of using a playbook within Prism Central with this script here that he's provided in his blog post, to basically read VM names. So if you have a good, healthy VM nomenclature around naming them, like if you have P in there and you have a site name and you have an app name, then it can read all that, and of course just apply like regex to scrape out all those values and then tag it appropriately. So it's a great way to be able to, in one shot, create a bunch of useful tags and categories on your VMs, on your clusters. When you have nothing, you actually can even have this run on new VM creation. So this can be more than just a one-time script. You actually can have this run as kind of a, hey, once per hour, check for newly created VMs. And if they haven't been categorized, then apply these logical categories to them. So even some helpful day 2 operations there to kind of keep some good hygiene going within your environment. So overall, I think it's pretty fantastic. It's a great blog post. If you want to see what the one thing we can't do on a podcast, right, is show you like what the user interface looks like for anything, right? We can describe it to you with very pretty words, but if you want to see what this process looks like for how to convert a cluster from one hypervisor to another, this is what the interface looks like in Nutanix and how quickly you can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, for sure. Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers.
Well, I'm still, I got my customer hat on this one for sure. So the first thing I'm thinking of is, how many products would I have had to do this in the past? And so for me, it would have been VMware, Zerto, the Dell backend or EMC backend at the time that I was buying. So now what I'm seeing is, in one platform, one foundation product, with all this goodness, I can buy the clusters. I can manage the clusters with Prism Central. I then can go and purchase the Leap features and that go on top of it. But just how all of this will bring my product set down, instead of all these different products I'm having to use and piece together, I now can do all this under one umbrella and assume that I can call one support number and go, hey, I'm having problems with this, and I'll be able to get help. And that help will know the product from end to end. I set something like this up similarly when I was at CNSA, but I was using other products. And there were times that I would have to call specific vendors that didn't have knowledge of the underlying infrastructure. And that made the conversations very difficult, because you've got to trust this. I mean, people don't put this in and hope that it works. They're going to be testing this. They're going to be doing, I love the idea of doing the playbooks. That was not something that was at my fingertips at the time. I've been in the Prism Pro and seen the low code, no code is awesome for people that don't have any coding experience to get some automation happening. So for me as a customer, I'm going, wow, I can, there's risk to VMware now. I now have a way of getting, away from VMware on the AHV, which I'm already paying for if I own Nutanix clusters. Some people say that it's free. It's not free. It's built into the system and built into the price. Let's be honest with our customers. But then coming back with Leap, our data protection services, or whatever the name is, the formal artist name we're talking now, to be able to create this kind of replication and ability to go between two clusters, i.e. data centers, is really, man, a compelling story, and one that if I was a customer buying technology, that I would definitely be looking at this and looking at the numbers of what this costs versus other solutions that I'd be looking at.
Well, and I think it's so interesting, Ben. It's a great point to think about, like, upcoming changes. And it's like, well, what kind of upcoming changes can this kind of system tolerate once it's set up that are really non-events, right? If I've got 4 nodes and 4 nodes at each site, so eight nodes total, and I grow, yay, my business is growing. I grow to 8 nodes per site, 60 in total. That's a non-event to this configuration, right? I move some workloads out to the cloud. I shrink down to 6 and 6. That's a non-event to this configuration, right? Clusters grow, clusters shrink. That's all dynamic on our side. The upgrades on both sides, right? Full stack management, from everything from like NIC firmware and BIOS up to hypervisor storage, and this replication management code and operations and the automation for the failover, all managed right through LCM for my upgrades, as well as like, hey, we hit 5 years, the hardware is deprecated. I need to, move on to a new solution. Maybe I want to change from something like Supermicro or Dell onto like an HP platform. Again, a non-impactful change to this configuration, right? Keeps on running the entire time as we change all the tires on the bus as we drive down the highway, right? Or to use an analogy. So the freedom and flexibility of what you can do, because it becomes part of your private cloud without having to re-engineer the solution, right? Every 5 years, if you were on any other platform, if you were going to throw away the compute and storage and refresh both at once, to your point, that's a lot of work that we just described. And we can do both of those on Nutanix with basically zero operator interaction whatsoever. So it can really practically give you back a lot of time in your day to focus on, frankly, more important things, right? The business can just trust this and let you go work on what's next.
Now, I do have another question about it. I did have stretch layer 2 in my environment. That was a very difficult thing for me to achieve. What are you guys seeing out in the field? How many customers are set up with a stretch layer 2 environment between their data centers?
Comes down a little bit to their networking provider. It's certainly easier on others and harder on some. Depends on scale, depends on how many sites they might have in play. Both are valid, and I'd say it's about where do you want to put the easiness, right? Like if you're not doing it, well, now your networking configuration is simple, but you need a lot of kind of monitoring and planning around, okay, if I just have 2 sites, keep it simple. Now I need to track 2 IP addresses and which one's live in DNS and which one are my customers going to get to, my internal application users going to get to. Load balancing gets kind of fun. So we're kind of, in my opinion, as a non-network guy, just someone who's kind of network competent / dangerous, we're moving complexity into the OS and up, right? And my recovery plans compared to maybe it's more expensive at the network layer, maybe it's more initial setup, but now I don't have to worry about any of that from my OS and up level to push that down into the network stack. So, I mean, scalability matters here, right? Your gateways, tromboning your traffic. There are considerations that, frankly, you shouldn't come to me for guidance on. There are smarter people to look at your scenario and tell you which one's the better choice for you, but both are valid for sure.
So I think a question I would have to ask my company is, what's your RTO? How fast do you want to get back up?
Sure.
Stretch layer 2, no IP conflicting, no IP changes. VM's going to run just the same as it did in primary. Good to go. So I think a lot of that you have to have those conversations with your organization. And, what do you want your RPO to look like? What do you want your RTO to look like? What stress do you want the business to incur while we're getting to our RTO? Because, they talk about business continuity, and business continuity and DR they work together, but they're different. And in times of trying to maintain continuity while you're doing DR practice, that can get stressful very quick. And so, very interesting. Another question I have has to come with the playbook. So this gentleman's written this very elaborate script. If I'm hearing you correctly, this script was put together with our low code, no code, and then exported and can be imported back in. Am I hearing that correctly? Or did this gentleman actually fat finger this into this, text file and it imported in? Educate me on that. I'm wondering.
No, totally. Yeah, exactly like you described. It's importable, exportable. You can write it in one PC and then give it to your customers or give it to a teammate as well, like the way he's posted it here into his blog post. Yeah. So we say it's low code, no code. It actually can also you can inject code into it, right, to do even more fancy, advanced stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As an employee learning the product, this has been one thing this is incredible to be able to bring this type of automation and not have to understand a coding background. It's just incredible for an administrator.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing. And you haven't heard me say it yet, Ben, since you're here and you're new, Nutanix for your sanity. You don't have to go and learn every bit of this, right? You don't have to be a networking expert. You don't have to be a coding expert. You don't have to be a DR expert, but you get all of those things out of this one platform, to your point. So,
yeah. Well, how about one more freebie to give the audience? So if you go to nutanix.dev, which is our site focused on developers, there's an entire code library under automation and then playbooks library where, so this is one example of a playbook. There's other code samples for other playbooks all up there that you can download and then upload into your Prism Central to get those other pre-written playbooks at your disposal there. So if you take nothing else away from today, there's a freebie for you that there's more playbooks than you already even see inside your Prism Central.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anything else from your customer mindset, Mr. Rogers?
No, my biggest thing right now is I would love to get in the lab and see this thing run in real time. If I could break it, if anybody could, I could. So that's really my next goal, is to take this blog and kind of go, hey, let's put this in the lab and see if this comes to reality. But for me, being a former customer, this would be great, especially some of the challenges that we're looking from a marketplace, not just technology, but how the market's changing. And then also with all the changes that are going on with vendors that, have been around for years, this is a good direction and something I think a lot of people are going to be looking at. And if Nutanix can make it as easy as it's documented, Katie, bar the door, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jirah, to that point, how can we learn more?
I love learning from labs. So I know I can get those from my friendly Nutanix account team. I can get that from XenTegra. Boot camps make that easy as well. So yeah. I would look for the next one of those coming up and probably try to join that.
That sounds like a good idea to me. And if they do that, then I'll be right there with them to host and kind of train them through. So definitely looking forward to jumping on with anybody who decides to get on, learn some more, ask some more questions, go through this process, however you want to experience it, we will make that happen.
Harvey, where would I look to find out what the next upcoming boot camp is?
Man, you can just go to XenTegra.com and check out our events page, and that's where we have them listed. But I will say, I believe off the top of my head, so you should make me do it off the top of my head, but I believe the next one is the 29th of July. So got one coming.
That sounds like enough time to listen to this episode and then go register.
Yeah, you absolutely can go register right now. So yeah, XenTegra.com, and you'll go to the events page, and all events will show you everything that we have, not just the Nutanix workshop that I'm doing. It'll show you everything there. You can also get to all of our podcast episodes because you love this one so much and you want to listen to the other ones. So
I hear there's at least 54.
I know, 54, 53, 2, 36, whichever one you want. All right. I appreciate it, guys. Definitely appreciate you getting on and discussing this. And we will have fun next week.
Cool. Talk to you then.
Have a good one.